Hey there! Thank you for joining me today to learn how to hand stitch. Today I'm going to be teaching you how to do a beautiful finishing hem that's invisible and kind of slightly decorative that'll help you to create heirlooms out of your handmade pieces. My name is Bonnie Lewis. I am a freelance tailor. I've worked in the fashion industry for 20 years, traveling all over the world with fashion brands to tailor clothes before they go on models. And now what I'm passionate about doing is teaching you how to sew. If you like what I teach you, please take a minute to subscribe to this channel, follow me on Instagram, and check out my 6 workshop online, on demand, at your own time, at your home, basic Learn to Sew sewing series, where I teach you all the skills that I believe you need to sew anything you want in 6 quick workshops. So let's get started learning how to do a beautiful blind hand stitch. Okay, so here I have everything I need to do a hand stitch. We are going to be doing the fell stitch, which you can see a little bit of right there. I love this as a finish for a facing. It just creates kind of a decorative heirloom stitch. This is my Wild Rose Robe pattern. This pattern is available on commonsewing.com. It's kind of a kimono style robe, and I thought it would be really nice with a contrasting facing for the neckband. So what you need to do here is you need thread, obviously. You need a hand stitching needle, and if you're with me today, you're probably a bit of a beginner, so don't worry about the different types of hand stitching needles. You have time to learn those. Today, just get a good variety pack with a number of different sizes and pick the one you like best. I am going to, well, let me point out first, anytime you're hand stitching, I am a prep 5 times tailor once kind of tailor. So what I've got here is my facing. Before I even get into hand stitching it, I've pressed the seam where I sewed the facing onto it. And then I went ahead and created a line of pins here at the middle to make sure that my facing is lying nice and flat throughout and that the grain stays consistent. And then I've also pinned it along the fold line at the edge of the facing where I will be stitching. Okay. So I am going to take my hand stitching needle. I'm going to take my piece of thread. I cut my thread about, when I'm doing handwork, usually no more than 20-24 inches. And the reason that I cut a relatively short thread is and when I thread my needle, I always snip it so I have a nice fresh fiber to go through that tiny eye of the needle. But getting back to why I hand stitch with a short thread, I was on a fashion show in New York Fashion Week with a couture designer, and I was hemming a silk gown, very simple silk gown. And I was thinking use a longer thread because I won't have to change it out so much. I won't have to tie it off and start again so much. And as I'm stitching, he came running over and he said, no short thread, or no long thread. And the reason I found out was because when you're doing an invisible stitch, which is what we're going to do here, it's kind of a hybrid between a felled stitch and a blind stitch. You want to see your stitch on the inside, but you want to see none of your stitch on the outside. And with a longer thread, you have more opportunity for the thread to subtly mark the face fabric. So if you can, just work with a shorter thread and tie it off more often. Now when I tie my knot, I double my thread up on the end so I can get a thicker knot. I just tie it, a little rabbit through the hole. And then I'm going to snip my thread tail. So here, a nice little knot. There's the little ugly edge. Okay, so we're going to begin here. We're going to be stitching in this direction, and my stitch is going to look like this. It's going to have this tiny little peak at each point that I stitch between the facing and the face of the garment. Okay, so I'm actually going to start from underneath the facing, between the facing and the face, because I want to hide my thread tail. So I get that thread tail in there. All right, so my stitch wants to be about a 1/16 of an inch away from the edge, or as close as possible. And then I go through the facing from the bottom to the top. So the thread is coming from the top of the facing. And then I just want to catch a few fibers of the fabric on the face of the fabric where I want to join the facing to the face. Okay? And I'm going to pull that, not pull it too tight, and then 1/4 inch away, I will put my needle from the bottom to the top of the facing, pull the thread not too tight, and I will just grab a few fibers of the face fabric to join the facing to the face. Now, from the bottom to the top of the facing, 1/4 inch away, pull it not too tight, and just grab a few fibers of my face fabric. Now I'm just going to quietly do this for a moment and let you watch. Okay, so now when it's time to tie it off, pull these together. I will pull my needle. This is to tie it off. Let's say it's time. YouTube's not going to give me enough time to do all of those. So I'll put my needle through my fabric and I will wrap my thread around it 3 times. And then, oops, don't let it fall off. And then I will pull the needle through, and that creates a little triple knot. That's called a tailor's knot. Now, to hide my thread tail, to make my garment more beautiful, I will run the thread tail underneath the facing, and then I'll snip it close to the facing and it will disappear. So that, future tailor, is how I do a fell blind stitch. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you like what I'm doing, I am going to be doing weekly tailoring updates with little tips from the trade that I've picked up in my 20 years of being a freelance tailor in the fashion industry. So please hit that subscribe button on my YouTube channel, follow me, Common Sewing on Instagram, and pop over to the website and check out if you want to learn all of the skills you need to make anything you want in 6 easy workshops that you'll get 6 fun things out of. Pop over to commonsewing.com and look for my online beginner sewing series. It's wonderful and you will be able to make anything you want. So thanks for joining me today and happy sewing.